contextualize conversation with perspective.
CBS News. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, Sunday on CBS.
Tonight, as weight loss drugs soar in popularity, why are more healthcare plans putting restrictions on them? Then, renters facing eviction as pandemic-era rules expire. And as shelters fill up, what are major cities prepared to do as more migrants seek help? On the CBS
Everything that President Trump did was with the advice of lawyers.
On that day, President Trump asked me to put him over the Constitution, but I chose the Constitution.
I strongly disagree with Fitch's decision, and I believe it is entirely unwarranted.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The former president returns to Washington, not to visit the White House, as some former presidents do, not to take a seat of honor at some national celebration, not to attend an academic conference studying his presidency or to deliver a speech on a matter of national importance. No, the former president returns to Washington to be arraigned on felony charges for what he did as president. And what he did as president has never been done before. Thus, the charges being brought against him have never been seen before. Therefore, Washington continues to react to another historic day. President Trump's indictment on 4 felony counts in the January 6th special counsel case. The former president is due in court here in Washington, D.C. tomorrow. He is denied wrongdoing. Multiple 2024 Republican candidates have come in some manner or another to the former president's defense. But after the indictment, former Vice President Pence, whose role on January 6th is detailed in the 45-page indictment, criticized his former boss's actions.
I really do believe that anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. And anyone who asks someone else to put themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States again.
For more on this, Robert Costa and Scott McFarland join us now. Robert is CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Robert, I want to start with you. The former vice president has been vocal, both first in statement and now in comments at the Indiana State Fair, and he's a fact witness in this matter.
He's emerging as a key witness in this investigation based on the indictment, also emerging as a key critic of Trump in the 2024 Republican presidential race. Pence is so crucial because he was the last option for Trump in those final days of the Trump administration. He believed that if he could just nudge Pence to somehow disavow what was going on January 6, 2021, and not be the overseer of this process, but be someone who actively tried to ruin it and upend it, then he could stay in office and hold on to the presidency. Pence, as we all know, and now under oath detailed to the grand jury, refused to do so. And the details of what Trump said to Pence on January 5th and January 6th are really going to matter in terms of whether Trump is convicted here. Did Pence tell this grand jury that he believed Trump was really asking him to break the law? Pence has said publicly he doesn't know if Trump had criminal intent, but that he is really now the person to watch as a witness.
And Robert, I want to get your sense of the vocalness that has come from the vice president today, because it seems to have been accelerated by the fact pattern laid out in the indictment, like he is somehow now being thrust into this moment that he had to anticipate because he knew he had testified to the special counsel.
It's fascinating political, historical, legal timing, because this all coincides with Pence being on the brink of maybe leaving the Republican presidential race if he doesn't make that debate stage in August later this month. Pence needs to show the Republican electorate that he's a competitive candidate in the 2024 race, and he's also playing for his own legacy by reminding people about what he went through in 2021. And he seems to now be unbound in a way we haven't seen Mike Pence for years. Major, I covered him going back to the House of Representatives. This has always been someone who is tightly wound in terms of his political message. He comes from the radio show days in Indiana. He had the Mike Pence show. He famously called himself Rush Limbaugh on decaf. Right. But he was always contained, and he's still contained now in what he's telling voters. But he's saying that Trump asked him to break the law and go against the Constitution. Because of the way Pence delivers the line, it seems calm and normal, but the message, the words are anything but.
Scott McFarland, you have been covering all of this and so much at the federal courthouse dealing with ramifications, criminally and otherwise, of January 6th. Give our audience a sense of what it's likely to witness tomorrow.
Tomorrow is going to happen no matter what. Donald Trump's going to be having this initial appearance no matter what. The complexion of that hearing, though, is subject to change, Major. Let's talk about the courthouse itself. They have these types of appearances several times a day, every weekday. Initial appearances by felony criminal defendants. Typically, they take just a few minutes. The defendant's brought into the courthouse, sometimes to the marshals for processing, potentially fingerprinting or booking, then brought to the courtroom where he or she can enter a not guilty plea, learn something about the release conditions. Will there be restrictions on his or her travel, on his or her talking to possible witnesses in the case? Maybe in some serious cases involving people who are a flight risk, you give up your passport, you have a booking photo taken. The latter won't happen with former President Trump, but all of this should be wrapped up in the matter of a few minutes. It's a garden variety proceeding, but this is not a garden variety defendant.
To put it mildly. And yes, as we all know, existentially and otherwise, tomorrow will come no matter what. Tell us a little bit about the judge who has been given this case, how that process played out, meaning how the judge got it, and who this judge is.
After tomorrow, after the former president faces the magistrate judge in this case, his case shifts to Judge Tanya Chutkin, a U.S. district judge appointed in 2014 by then-President Obama. I've been in Judge Chutkin's court a lot, watching a number of January 6th sentencing hearings by the dozen. I can tell you she is uniquely, distinctively strident in her denunciations of January 6th and critical of everything that gave rise to it. She's called January 6th horrifying. She's called it a violent attempt to overthrow the government. She has said the people in that mob were showing fealty to one man, not to the Constitution. She has been the rare judge here in Washington, among the dozens of judges to handle January 6 cases, to exceed the Department of Justice recommendations for sentences for defendants. She toes a hard line, a distinctively hard line, in cases involving January 6th.
And Robert, I want to ask you about something that has begun to formulate around the Trump camp, which is he was following the advice of lawyers and therefore is immune from any sort of successful prosecution because the president was just listening to what some lawyers told him.
He was following the advice of lawyers. He was also pushing his lawyers to be aggressive and to try to overturn the election.
When other lawyers were telling him there is no basis by which to pursue this or these other particular strategies.
So he really listened to outside counsel. During the final days of the administration, Sidney Powell, an outside lawyer, was telling him, you have the right to have an executive order and seize voting machines with the military. Rudy Giuliani was saying, we can go to the states and have the state legislatures send electors along. John Eastman, a conservative lawyer from California, was saying Mike Pence could walk away from the lectern on January 6th, and this whole process could be delayed for days, if not weeks. He really listened to them over people like Eric Hirschman, a White House attorney, or Pat Cipollone, his then White House counsel, or his then Attorney General William Barr. All of these lawyers around Trump informally inside of the administration were saying you do not have the right or the evidence or any kind of legal basis for trying to overthrow this election. But Trump kept listening to people on the outside. That said, Trump was always saying to them, let's do more. What else can we do? Let's take this to the brink. I talked to so many sources who were close to Trump in the final days, and they say he was the ringleader, in their view, of the effort.
The driving force. Scott McFarland, very quickly before I let you and Robert go, any sense of the general approach in terms of security or other things around the courthouse tomorrow?
There'll be a Secret Service escort for the former president. There'll be a heavy police presence and perimeter. We saw the same thing in Miami last month and the same thing in Manhattan earlier this year. It's also quite possible, Major, we don't see the former president. He'll likely be brought through an underground entrance into a courthouse where cameras are prohibited.
Robert Costa and Scott McFarland, thank you both very, very much. The charges in Trump's most recent indictment are similar to what we heard from the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. We will speak to its lead investigator, that committee's lead investigator, next. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News. An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. CBS News has identified 5 of the 6 people who are possibly the co-conspirators listed in Donald Trump's most recent indictment. These identities were determined by matching what's in the document to our previous reporting. The first possible co-conspirator appears to be the former president's ex-attorney, Rudy Giuliani. In the hours after the indictment was unsealed, Giuliani addressed the allegations. Let's listen.
No way I can confirm or deny that because they have not sent me a target letter, a subject letter, and any kind of letter. Everything I know about this is exculpatory. This is a historic and very, very sad indictment because it's probably one of the biggest attacks the United States government has made on free speech in our very, very long and illustrious history.
Joining me now is Tim Fahy. He's former lead investigator for the House January 6th committee. Tim, as you well know from the indictment, there are 6 co-conspirators. They are not mentioned, but one of them is thought to be former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, attorney for former President Trump. And he has said, and our audience just heard, that this indictment is, in his words, an assault on free speech. I'd like your reaction to that.
Well, there's a difference, Major, between speech and conduct. We protect speech in this country, have for a long time, as we should, but we don't protect illegal conduct. So what the special counsel has alleged here was that this was not simply speech. This was not simply rhetoric. This was rhetoric designed to actually provoke a response, and did provoke a response. So this may very well be the defense that comes forth in this trial, that this is an attempt to punish free speech. The response to that will be the president had just continued to say the election was stolen, but did not take act to essentially implement a strategy to prevent the election from being certified, then it wouldn't be a crime. It's the acts that are criminal, not the speech.
So one way to think about this, Tim, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if the former president had just said in any capacity as president, I think the election was stolen, but hadn't set in motion any effort to pressure state legislatures, create false slates of electors, or tell people who were filling out those fraudulent elector slates that they would only be used if the president were to prevail in a legal challenge and under no other set of circumstances. If those actions hadn't been taken, this would be free speech. But because those other actions were taken and is serially documented in the indictment, this becomes criminal.
Yes, just exactly right. Now, you could argue that it would still be reprehensible, that it would still be irresponsible, that there are a lot of other judgments that would pass upon advocacy of a false position or a position without evidentiary basis. But it wouldn't be criminal unless the speech were part of a very specific plan that was intended to disrupt an official proceeding and defraud the United States. That, again, is conduct, not speech. That's what's at stake here.
And the Select Committee made several criminal referrals after concluding its investigation. Some were incorporated into this indictment. Is this indictment, as you've read it, Tim, as broad as the Select Committee thought it could be, or less so?
Look, it reads very much like the Select Committee report. It actually reads very, very close to Liz Cheney, the vice chair's opening statement in our first hearing, where she methodically marched through the multi-part plan that President Trump and his conspirators enacted to prevent the certification. There is a menu here of facts and of federal statutes from which the special counsel could choose in crafting an indictment. My guess is there are additional facts beyond the indictment that the special counsel's team has developed. There certainly are other criminal charges that could have applied, but I think he has picked the two that most closely fit the facts: obstruction of an official proceeding and conspiracy. Those were two of the statutes that we specifically referred for his consideration when the Select Committee completed its work.
Tim, I think you have a unique perspective on this. One of the first reactions that came from the former president on his social media platform was, why didn't they do this 2.5 years ago? I think you are pretty familiar with the timeline here, but address that allegation from the former president that this is timed only to inhibit his campaign for the Republican nomination in 2024.
Yeah, Major, I can't speak to the pace of the Department of Justice and the decisions that were made internally. I think facts make cases, facts inform investigations. And I think the Select Committee's identification of facts that gave rise to the violations of federal criminal law was a hugely important step forward and showed not just the Justice Department, but the country that what happened here was a specifically intended multi-part plan to disrupt the joint session. Once those facts became evident, and that was because courageous people stepped forward and told the truth, because the Select Committee, my clients, the 9 members of the committee, put that case together. The Department of Justice really had little choice at that point but to dig further. And that's why we're here. It's not because of lawyers, or it's not because of decisions that were made. It's because of facts. And the facts here have brought us to this point.
And is it your belief, Tim Fahy, that the Select Committee's work accelerated or incentivized the Justice Department? Because I know there was for a time a disagreement about access to transcripts and the like. When history records the precipitating factor, how large do you believe the Select Committee's work will loom?
Look, I think the Select Committee was successful in uncovering really important facts. And again, facts matter. I think the facts that we uncovered were not yet known to the Justice Department or to anyone else. And the fact that we were able to get Bill Barr on videotape talking about all of the investigations that he did, and Cassidy Hutchinson courageously standing up and talking about all of the conversations that she was present for, that moved the needle factually. And again, I can't speculate as to what was going on inside the Justice Department, but the facts here that I think we successfully put together are what motivated conduct and have led us to this place.
You are, as I understand it, a criminal defense attorney. Is that correct?
I'm a white-collar and investigations lawyer at Wilkie, Farr & Gallagher, yes.
If the former president were your client, what kind of defense would you be mounting?
I'm not really sure I see a viable defense here. What I've heard from his lawyers is some kind of reliance on advice of counsel. That does not square, again, with the fact. It is not a legal defense to rely on legal advice that is patently unreasonable, that has no foundation in fact or law. Special counsel goes through very specifically in the indictment all of the lawyers and others that repeatedly told the president there is no evidence of systemic election fraud. The vice president does not have the authority to unilaterally reject slates of electors. The fact that one other lawyer may have unreasonably told him otherwise does not create a defense, because that's an unreasonable piece of advice. So I don't know, Major, what the defense here will be. The president's presumed innocent, as any other criminal defendant, as he should be. He'll have an opportunity to challenge this evidence in court, as is his right. I'll be looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
And Tim, before I let you go, one last quick question. Because the presidency is a singular position in our country and within our government, and carries with it an obligation to see that the Constitution is followed, in that manner of talking about, well, I was just taking advice from a lawyer, is there a higher standard for a president to understand what is or isn't within the bounds of the Constitution and therefore live within that?
Yeah, Major, that's a good question, but it's really a political question. Ultimately, presidents, like all elected officials, are accountable to voters. That's a little bit beyond my expertise, right? I'm the lawyer, and I can say
it doesn't create a higher legal standard, in other words.
No, it doesn't. Okay. I mean, he is held to the same legal standard. The government has to prove specific intent to take action with others that obstructed that official proceeding. That's why his belief about election fraud is so important.
Tim Fahy, lead investigator for the House Select Committee on January 6th. We thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Fitch Ratings is not a household word, but they pay attention to it on Wall Street. That's why it matters that Fitch Ratings has downgraded the U.S. government's top credit rating. Next, we'll get the administration's response. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, and fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman. Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
The decision is puzzling in light of the economic strength we see in the United States. I strongly disagree with Fitch's decision, and I believe it is entirely unwarranted. Its flawed assessment is based on outdated data.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's reaction to Fitch downgrading the United States' top credit rating. The White House, in a statement, said it also disagreed and blamed House Republicans, who the White House says were, quote, cheerleading default, unquote. Meanwhile, the Biden 2024 campaign is blaming former President Trump. It released a statement that said, in part, and I quote, "This Trump downgrade is a direct result of an extreme MAGA Republican agenda defined by chaos, callousness, and recklessness that Americans continue to reject," unquote. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins me now from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where the first family is vacationing. This had to come as a bit of a surprise, Weijia, because as you and I were covering all the drama around whether or not there would be a default or a debt ceiling deal, then we were wondering, would there be a downgrade? This sort of came out of the blue. It seems to me, at least from my perspective. Did it come out of the blue from the White House perspective?
Absolutely, Major. That's exactly what we heard from the Treasury Secretary today. She said, because if you look at the economy and everything that the administration has done since January 2021, she points to strong job creation, the fact that unemployment is down, and the fact that, the U.S. did not have to default on its loans, which, by the way, the president himself acknowledged that if that had happened, that the U.S. credit score would have plummeted, and that could have led to chaos for Americans trying to pay their bills. So because that didn't happen, and Fitch still downgraded the credit score, that's why it is so surprising. But Fitch is saying that, look, it's not just about whether you pay your bills. It's about all the political instability that ensues every time you get your bill and you have to pay it, because we did cover that showdown, Major, and because every time there is this discussion about whether to raise the debt ceiling, you see these two sides becoming more and more contentious. And it is that chaos that this credit ratings group is pointing to say, we can't be certain that America will be able to continue on this path of reaching a deal every time based on what we've observed, including on January 6th, 2021.
And Weijia, the White House is also bracing for some very intense conversations with Congress about spending bills, all of which have to be passed by the end of September, or guess what? We're back in that conversation about a shutdown.
Exactly. And, that is something that is also taken into consideration. This is what Fitch pointed out, that there will be continuous uncertainty because, again, there's so much disconnect between these two parties. And who is it that has to decide whether the money is going to come through or not? It's not the president, it's Congress.
And Weijia, I want to ask you about a recent luncheon between the president and former President Barack Obama, in which apparently some either campaign advice or some campaign volunteerism was discussed. What can you tell us?
We know that these two leaders met at the White House at the end of June, and that the former president said that he would do everything that he could to help President Biden win re-election in 2024. We also know that this isn't necessarily new, because even in the midterms in 2022, it was President Obama that was out stumping for candidates for for gubernatorial candidates and for those who are seeking election in Congress as well. It wasn't President Biden, because as you very well know, Major, when it comes to these campaigns and stump speeches and gathering huge crowds, Mr. Obama is known for that, being sort of a magnet for these huge crowds. The President Biden sort of shies away from that. And so perhaps that's what President Obama is talking about when it comes to doing as much as possible, not only to rally voters, but also to raise money for President Biden.
And it's obviously clear to both of them the stakes are high, and it will be a tough, if it is a rematch, a possibly tough rematch in 2024, yes?
Absolutely, because, we were just talking about a new New York Times and Santa College poll that came out yesterday that showed that Biden and Trump are actually neck and neck at 43%, despite the fact that Trump faces so many charges, not only on the federal level, but on the state level, local level, and there could be more coming. And so the White House, as well as campaign sources, Major, even though outwardly are saying, of course, America's not going to reelect Trump, they are well aware that, it is going to be a tough match if it is Trump who is the nominee.
Coming to us from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where the first family is vacationing, at least for a little bit of this summer, Weijia Jane, we thank you so very much. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. I bet you already knew that, but just a quick reminder. Also, another one. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go person to person.